Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Life is uncertain. It's okay to feel stressed, anxious, worried, or frustrated. CalHope can help. Access CalHope's free and secure mental health resources. Call 833-317-4673 or live chat at calhope.org. Ozcast.
Hello world, I'm John Bruni and you're listening to Strategicon, your window to all things security and foreign affairs. In this episode of Strategicon from the United States, we'll be joined by Dr. Imad Harb, SIA's Senior Non-Resident Fellow, Greater Middle East, and Director of Research and Analysis at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C., to discuss the international price of oil, now in negative territory, and what effect this will have on the Middle East and the world as a whole. Joining us in the studio today is co-host David Olney. Hello, David.
Good morning, John. Good morning, listeners.
And slaving away through the technology of the moment, our producer, Tim Whiffen. Hello, Tim.
Thank you for having me.
Before we start today's episode, I would like to remind listeners that Strategicon can be found on the Ozcast network, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and on the Sage International Australia website, www.sageinternational.org.au. Imad, welcome back to Strategicon.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Imad, let's go back to the beginning. How did the collapse in the price of oil happen?
How deep? I think it's as deep as the countries that are suffering it suffer from it. In other words, this is something of as far as I'm concerned, it's really a shocker for the oil economies. It is consequently a shocker for not only for their economic situation, but also a shocker for their future political and social situation. In other words, future security and peace and order inside their countries. So this is really a very, very big shock. It's hard to really pin the blame on any specific one party or a group of parties, as a matter of fact. There are many, many factors to this, but there definitely is a blame of some important actors in the international oil market. And, they could be the Gulf countries, specifically Saudi Arabia, Russia, OPEC not being able to really deal with the problem that has occurred. And the ever-present so far, the coronavirus crisis that has basically slowed down the international economy and thus hit the very basic demand for the oil that we are talking about.
With the price of oil so low and with critical producers now robbed of the revenue stream derived from this commodity, how will this affect Russia's position in Syria, Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen, and Iran's confrontation with US forces in the Gulf?
This is a very good question, very big question. The current price today, the price is probably about West Texas Intermediate is probably about $31, $32. And this is really significantly lower than what the international oil market generally would like it to be. On average, some countries like Iraq, for instance, they can deal, they don't really pay that much to extract that oil from the ground. So they can deal with the $10 and $15 oil. But for Saudi Arabia, for instance, whose oil comes a little more expensively, needs oil to be higher. Also, from budgetary considerations, for instance, Saudi Arabia or the Gulf countries want oil prices to be at $80, $85 a barrel. So this is for $31, $32 a barrel. You can imagine how much of a deficit the whole world and the whole oil economies are suffering from. So that translates into specific political and military problems for the countries concerned. First of all, like you asked, Russia and Syria I don't think that this specifically, the oil price crisis, or the oil availability, or where Russia stands on this, I don't think really it's going to be the influencing what Russia does in Syria, because the Russian involvement in Syria has basically overall has been on the cheap. The Russians have only deployed probably about 24 airplanes and a couple of thousand soldiers to Syria. So they're not very heavily invested. So they're not paying billions of dollars a year to participate in the Syrian war. So this is not necessarily going to be a backbreaker for Russia and Syria. On the other hand, it is a backbreaker for Saudi Arabia. Because, like I said earlier, Saudi Arabia requires oil to be at least $82 a barrel, so it can really balance its budget. This year, Saudi Arabia is running a budget deficit. It has been running a budget deficit for the last 3, 4, 5 years, as a matter of fact. But this year, the budget deficit is upwards of like 15% or something like that. So also the executive agencies, ministries, the armed forces, everybody across the board has been asked to do a 20% cut in their budgetary requirements. Qatar, for instance, asked for 30% cut. The United Arab Emirates between 20 and 30. So we're talking about, these are the big economies of the Gulf, and they are dependent on higher oil and higher gas prices, and they are suffering because of the dwindling resources. Saudi Arabia's role in Yemen is completely opposite to the role that Russia plays in Syria. Saudi Arabia is heavily invested in Yemen, heavily involved, and its armed forces are, whether they are ground forces or sea forces or the Air Force, all of them are involved in one way or another in the Yemen war. Today, the Yemen war, there is a hiatus, there is a ceasefire, and the Saudis are not necessarily paying way too, are being very involved there. But nonetheless, Saudi Arabia, like for instance, between 2015 and 2019, Saudi Arabia was spending upwards of $5-6 billion a month on the war in Yemen. So that is really a hefty price to pay. And when you talk about oil price per gallon, per barrel being so low, so we're talking about Saudi Arabia really hurting from continuing the war in Yemen. This is why Saudi decision makers have to really make very important decisions regarding their involvement there. For Iran, the issue is. This is a low oil price, but yet at the same time, Iran has not necessarily benefited a whole lot from its oil sector since for at least 2 decades now, because of international and American sanctions. So it cannot sell its oil on the international market. It is sanctioned. It cannot do that. It is definitely smuggling oil. And China and other actors are helping Iran smuggle its oil because it needs, it has to do that. Otherwise, the whole economy will fully collapse. On the other hand, Iran does have alternate sources of income. In other words, the Iranian economy is not fully dependent on oil like the Gulf countries, like the Arab Gulf countries. Iranian economy has an economy of scale. It has an agricultural sector, an industrial sector. It has some tourism, although during the coronavirus, Iran and everybody else are suffering anyway. But generally speaking, the decline in the oil prices is not anything new to Iran as far as revenues from oil are concerned, because it has been suffering from sanctions for a long time. That said, still Iran is not necessarily really curbing its activities where it is involved. It's not curbing its activities in Syria or in Lebanon or in Iraq. So far, it has been able to weather this. The problem is it's not only that the state, the Iranian state is weathering this. The problem is the burden is on the Iranian people themselves. There is definitely a lot of suffering from bad economic times in general.
Yeah, probably something that addresses all three countries, Imad. And that is, in each case, they've got different levels of expectations. Like the Iranian population are used to things being difficult. The Russian population are used to things being difficult. The Saudi population have been bought off, thanks to oil money, for an extended period of time. So there's been talk that, at $40 a barrel, the Russians can just about keep, the economy upright. At $70, they can bumble along. You made the point the Saudis need 82. The Iranians have diversified out of necessity. Is Saudi's population the most fragile because they are the most accustomed to oil and oil money flowing? And does that, in some ways, strangely, make them the most vulnerable of the three countries for genuine social chaos as a consequence of a decline in oil prices?
Good question. I think vulnerability is across the board. The Russian people are vulnerable because the Russian economy is not doing great, actually. Neither is the Iranian economy, no matter how diversified they are. And by the way, the diversification of the Russian economy also helps in breaking this problem with low oil prices. So they do have other economic activities to rely on. But in the Saudi case, it's very, very difficult. It is really difficult. We're talking about people just about 2 weeks ago. The royal court announced that they are going to be stopping the extra bonuses or extra services that have been ordered in 2018 as of next June, as of next week, basically, practically. So they also are tripling their value-added tax because they want more tax revenues. So in other words, they're trying to make up for some of the deficit that the lower oil prices are causing. This is not going to be very pleasant, and it's not going to be very pleasantly received. They're on the people's side. These people are not going to be very happy because Saudi citizens and all Gulf citizens, as a matter of fact, Arab Gulf citizens, have been used to this social contract between the state and the people, where the state provides and the people just simply take and provide loyalty in return. It is affecting, however, the hopes of the decision makers, the hopes of the royal family, and specifically the hopes of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for a diversified economy, and for a diversified economy that includes building cities, includes investments, includes opening up society to different new sectors, tourism, entertainment, all this. So basically what is called Vision 2030 is going to be the most to suffer from the lower oil prices. And it's, as far as I'm concerned, it's only a matter of time until the Saudi government decides that maybe we can do with less arms imports. Maybe we can do with less luxury items for the royal family or anybody else. In other words, maybe austerity, not necessarily austerity in the traditional sense that developing countries try to practice, but austerity in the sense of trying to cut down on the large ticket items that the Saudi state has become accustomed to, basically since the 1960s, with the oil revenues being the way they were. So now it's all of this is going to come down to how the political system, how the government and the royal court are going to be able to manage this landing. I don't think it's a soft landing, neither is it a very difficult and hard landing, but it is definitely a slowing down of all those economic activities, all those benefits, all those social programs that Saudi citizens have been used to for a long, long time. So whether this leads to something in the way of political agitation or people being dissatisfied with how things are, or demonstrations in the streets, is probably a far-fetched proposition. But still, at the same time, I don't think they're going to be very, very happy with what the coming months and years are bringing to Saudi society.
Imad, you were saying something about the social contract between the citizens of the Gulf and their regimes. Now, we know because of our work in the Gulf that there's also another component to this, and that is that the oil revenues coming into their respective countries also allows them to buy in specialist expertise to help keep their countries operating. So with the drop of oil revenue, what will this mean for that kind of socio-economic model? If they can't afford to buy in foreign expertise, how do you expect the Gulf monarchies to sustain themselves in the medium term? Because there are Arabization programs whereby the countries involved wanted to try to develop the skill base of the locals. Hasn't been particularly successful, shall we say.
That's actually true. That's very, very true, and it is. This is where things are going to be a bit dicey. The social contract was basically built upon the fact that the king is the one who rules and who basically owns the country. The king in Saudi Arabia or in any other Arab Gulf state. The ruler is the one who owns this means of production. In other words, he owns the oil fields, he owns the production, all that. So the state, as represented in the person of the ruler, is the main economic actor. In other words, any public sector, any private sector is dependent on the expenditures that the state puts into the market. So basically, the state is the only economic actor practically. Now, when the state has this economic problem where revenues are not necessarily as they used to be, there's bound to be a change in the perception of that state and that state's power in society. So the social contract that I mentioned is the social contract of it's a patronage relationship. The state and as represented in the royals is the one that's providing the benefits, and the people are the ones who are receiving it. But yet, in exchange, they're paying back in loyalty and support for the ruling order. When the original basis of this social contract is shaken, where the state is not necessarily being able to provide all those services that people were used to, then you start wondering, okay, how long will this population remain quiet? We also have to think about that the social contract, specifically in the Arabian Gulf, states, the social contract has developed throughout the 20th century. And with that social contract, the state that was the funder of all activity, also funded the populations who got education in the West or anywhere else, in the West or the East. These people have built what has become a new social, new middle class, the middle class that's dependent on the state itself. All these people are educated. All these people have suffered from what we all suffer from, theory of rising expectations. If these things don't come to you all the time, you're going to be questioning, why are they not coming to me all the time? The only problem with this is the Arab middle class in these countries has been so dependent on foreign labor, which you mentioned, has been dependent on foreign labor and foreign expertise to build their societies. So now they are in a bind. They cannot get rid of that foreign laborer because they need that foreign laborer to produce what the state wants to produce. But yet at the same time, They have to get rid of the foreign laborers so that they themselves can have jobs, they themselves can take control of their own economy. So between now and who knows when, there will be, and this has shown in different aspects of these societies, between now and the next few years, there will be a social movement towards okay, why do we live the way we live? I mean, what is going to be happening to us if we are not going to be supplied the same material resources that we had been supplied with for a long time? This is basically the crux of the political question for all these regimes. What is to happen to these political regimes once the population starts questioning whether they want to go along and continue with the same social contractual agreements that they have had with the rulers, or whether they say, well, now I want to have a piece of the pie. I want to help in making the decisions. And, this has been going on for a long time. It has been developing extremely gradually. But the 1990s and the first decade of the 2000s have shown that these people are no longer as pliant as they used to be earlier. And that's specifically because the state has gotten a bit weaker. The population, the middle class has gotten a little bit stronger. And at the same time, while the state is the main economic actor, it also has been effective in creating a private sector in these societies. Now, the private sector is weak. It's dependent on the state, yet it is the private sector. These are businessmen, these are doctors, lawyers, business people who travel all over the world, have financial heft, no matter how small they are, and no matter how much political decision-making they make. But they still are a force in society. To me, this is going to be probably an engine of change. The private sector, the educated middle class, that's going to be trying to change how things take place in the Gulf, specifically politically.
Imad, just on that point of the middle class. Now, normally a middle class, once they get to that position of having the education higher, having higher expectations, the education that they got, they value, but they value education even more for their children. Is this going to present a problem that, the Arab world can't afford Western expertise anymore, but will need to spend more money on getting its own people educated, and yet by getting its own children educated, it exposes them to a radically different environment, normally the West, where there will be more freedom and more political participation? Is this a terrible thing of they might stall educational development because they see it as being too politically dangerous?
I don't know, the irony of history for the Arab world is that the Arab world has, since the early days of independence, has, the Arab state, no matter how authoritarian or oppressive it has succeeded in one thing. It has succeeded in improving the living standards, the educational living standards of their citizens. In other words, they still are oppressive, autocratic, and they don't have necessarily popular legitimacy. They have tried to buy people off with offering social services, one of which is education. They have educated their populations. There are a lot of people with brains in the Arab world, but none of them can participate in government. I mean, hardly anyone can participate in government. So this is why education cannot be stopped. I mean, you cannot tell a Saudi citizen today to stop sending their children to school. You just can't do that. So he's going to continue to send his children to school. He's going to continue to try to send them to the best colleges around the world. And if he cannot do that anymore, he's going to lose faith in that specific state that previously allowed him to do that. So I don't think that the Arab state is interested in stopping people from getting education. The problem is, how long will the Arab state continue to deprive educated people from participating in governing their own societies? All those college professors who can each one can crank out a book every month. I mean, don't you think these people want to be participating in government or in making decisions for their societies? This is the big paradox of these states. The big paradox of the states that wanted to be modernizers. They modernized their societies. They allowed for healthcare, no matter how poor it is, but still, nevertheless, they allowed healthcare to come into those societies and thrive. They allowed education, but yet at the same time, did not allow these people who got educated and who got really in the middle class, they didn't allow them to participate in making decisions that affect their own personal life.
Given that this period with oil prices and with the entire COVID situation can be a catalyst for change, as we've kind of mentioned, do you think that there's any real chance that things will go back to the way they were? Do you think that there's any kind of sentiment in that middle class who is feeling as if they want to dictate their own future in their society, that they will accept going back to what was?
I don't think that Arab societies or Gulf societies are different from the world at large. I mean, this is when the world comes back from this pandemic. All societies are going to have the same problem. Okay, how do we get back to normal? What is normal anyway? I mean, has actually ever been a normal? There been a normal? I doubt that there was any normal over the last 10, 20 years. I mean, things have been changing so much. But at the same time, economies have to come back. People have to go back to work. Children have to go back to school. College students have to go back to their colleges. Society has to come back to some form of normalcy. Whether these states are capable of going back to something that is comfortable, a comfortable normal, is something it depends on their economic situation. Now, all of them are suffering from the coronavirus. All of them, the Gulf countries, are suffering from the coronavirus and the lower oil prices. At the same time, the countries that are not oil producers are also dependent, in large part, on rents from the oil-producing countries. A lot of these of the Arab world depends on the oil sector indirectly by working in the Gulf, by having people who work there and sending remittances to their families and brothers and sisters, and at the same time by receiving monetary outlays from Gulf countries. In other words, Saudi Arabia can write a check, for instance, to although they haven't done it in a long time because they're punishing the Lebanese. They can write a check for $500 million tomorrow and send it to Beirut's central bank. The Lebanese will be very, very grateful, and Lebanon will be helped in that sense. So Jordan, Egypt, Iraq, Syria, well, Syria has its own problems today anyway. Libya has its own problems. Morocco, Sudan, all these countries are dependent one way or another on the oil sector. So the question of whether they can go back or not go back to the way things were is dependent specifically on how well they can really adjust to this problem that is caused, this economic problem that's caused by the coronavirus. It's unlikely that they are going to be able to go back easily. It's going to be very, very gradual, and it's going to be very, very difficult for them. Just like the Western countries have suffered and the Western economies have closed down and a lot of deficits, and the United States is already has already added probably about $3 to $4 trillion in deficit spending because of the coronavirus. So the Arab world didn't have the money in the first place, except for the oil producing countries. And the oil producing countries themselves are also now Saudi Arabia, Qatar, UAE. All of them are selling bonds in the market. I mean, they're trying to find money to make up for the oil revenue that they have lost. So yes, they can go back to how things were, but without a strong economy, they cannot. But yet, at the same time, they cannot go back to tell their people that this is another question of, okay, on what conditions is society going to go back? Are we always going to go back to the same autocratic system or not? But then at the same, also, now it just occurred to me that yes, maybe we can go back to the same autocratic system because things are going to be so tough. The only way to control society is by more authoritarianism. So it depends on how each government wants to handle the situation. But I think the economy is going to be the crux of this whole thing.
It seems as if tough economic times could present even further problems for an autocratic system, just because you've got more people who are suffering, and then possibly more people who are starting to question whether that system is really the best thing for them. So
right.
It would be interesting.
Right, yeah. No, I mean, we can see it now. I mean, if I can expand on the point, we can see it now in, for instance, all Arab societies, all Arab states have practiced one form or another of authoritarianism, of oppression, right? So now everybody is blaming the coronavirus for yet more authoritarianism. I mean, they can. President Sisi of Egypt just promulgated new laws to fight the coronavirus. I mean, now he can declare anybody to be a terrorist now, even his own mother to be a terrorist if he chooses to, because the law allows him to. So all of them are using the coronavirus to increase their authoritarianism. Whether they can sustain it is a different story. Because once people don't have enough to eat, once people really find all their hopes to be dashed, I wonder if any state can really stop people from moving against them.
So while the fear is still there, you can be very opportunistic about it. But it will be interesting to see what happens if and when that fear subsides.
Right.
Imad, what are healthcare systems in the Arab world looking like? I would imagine that part of spending so much money in education has to, been to grow domestic health capacity, but also that they're relying on a lot of expats. Are health systems holding up? Are these areas being exempted from the budget cuts to try and allay people's fears? Or is a failure in health going to be a catalyst to making the states look even more fragile?
Yes. First of all, I want to plug a little something here. We just published at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C., we just published a piece by a colleague, her name is Yara Asi, on the Arab world's healthcare system, basically the healthcare sector. I urge your listeners and watchers to also, the viewers, and also look it up. It's a very good piece, but I'm no expert on the healthcare system in the Arab world. But what I learned is that the healthcare system, the Arab states have succeeded. I mean, when the Arab states began getting their independence in the 1940s and 50s, things were not that good. The socioeconomic status of people was rather low, and these states have been able to build an edifice for social services, including education and healthcare. But generally speaking, the healthcare sector is funded according to the abilities of the states that can or cannot fund. In other words, and I'm referring here to the piece that I'm referring to here on the Arab sector, on the Arab world's health sector. There are three tiers of states. Those are who have a lot of money. basically the Gulf states, have been doing well by their populations with spending and building hospitals and healthcare facilities and all that. Still, they are not necessarily very successful at it, specifically and essentially because all their healthcare sector depends on foreign labor, and this is a problem. If your nurse and your doctor and your healthcare worker, all of them are expats. What prevents them from leaving tomorrow, and you won't have anybody to really take care of your citizens? This is something they are very, very aware of. They are actually very, very worried about, and many of them are trying to ameliorate the situation. Except the situation is not easily dealt with, because we're talking about probably 45 million people with very, very low rate of medical education. So that's why there are so many expats who work in the healthcare sector. Then there are those states that are not doing so well, economically speaking, and these are always have a shortage in how to address public health issues. Specifically, coronavirus has exposed all of these states, including the Gulf states, to great deficiencies in how they have so far developed that sector. So the low-income ones are not doing very well at all. And then you have the ones with the conflict, the Libyas, the Yemens, the Syrias, where there is hardly any healthcare facilities working. Syria, 50% of Syria's healthcare sector was destroyed in the war by regime and Russian bombardment. So Libya doesn't have a whole lot, because the original regime of Muammar Gaddafi did not necessarily provide for state institutions to be able to build a good healthcare sector. There was a private sector, but rather poor. And in Yemen, this is a war that has been going on for a long time, and also healthcare facilities have been on the receiving end of a lot of bombardment. So unfortunately, this is not going to be addressed quickly or easily. This also depends on economic conditions, and the healthcare sector is unfortunately going to be waiting for these states to be able to provide what there needs to be provided. Currently, probably a lot of, if not all, a lot of the non-oil producing Arab world states are already approaching international lending institutions for desperately needed funds to be able to deal with the slowdown in the economy in general. I mean, for Egypt, there can hardly be, tourism can hardly be spoken of in Egypt while the coronavirus is going on, right? And other places as well. So all of these countries are running towards the lending institutions, trying to see if they can build some sort of if they can secure some sort of a loan situation to help them beyond the coronavirus.
I want to talk about the expat community again. It's one of those things that I really feel quite strongly about, having been one myself. And that is, now that the economic genie has been let out of the bottle with the collapse of oil prices, and as we said before, it's going to have specific impacts on the populations of the Gulf, both locals and expats. A significant portion of the expat community in the Gulf are other Arabs, non-Gulf Arabs. For instance, the Lebanese, the Palestinians,
right.
Many of whom have actually settled with the idea of living permanently in the countries that they work in. But they are considered by local authorities as guests only. And in many cases, they're treated rather abysmally by, the country that they happen to be in.
Right.
It struck me as strange as an Australian. I mean, as an actual foreigner in an Arab country, I kind of understood that there would be a degree of social friction between, a Westerner and the rest. But what struck me as odd and perhaps a little surprising was the degree of hostility that Gulf Arabs, and dare I say some contempt, that Gulf Arabs hold against other Arabs, and
Right.
now that the Gulf Arabs have to depend on keeping some form of stability over their expat population, particularly the Arab part of that population, do you see that there's going to be a social movement for broadening the degree of citizenship in these Gulf states to at least incorporate some of the critical non-Gulf Arab personnel that happen to be in, quite senior positions within either the bureaucracy or in the private sector?
If I may just simply correct a little something, paint these Gulf states with a broad brush of there is hostility towards other Arabs. I think it's a product of nationalism. It's a product of localism. I know I come from Lebanon. I know some areas of Lebanon cannot stand people from other areas of Lebanon. So, and these are of the same country. So there are a lot of Gulf Arabs who appreciate and like other Arabs. After all, they're the same language, the same religion, and probably thousands of years back, the same tribal origin. So, but yes, you're right. That there are those who resent the fact that some other Arabs are here, and why are they here, and all that stuff. But Arabs generally who work in the Gulf are generally higher on the economic ladder, so to speak. The manual laborers are mostly from South Asia, and it's just that the Arab who travels to these Arab countries has a higher level of education that qualifies him or her to land a job that is above the manual labor level. But yet, at the same time, I do not see how Gulf Arabs can accommodate more citizens from other Arab countries. Well, for currently speaking, I don't think that they can handle any more expats because of the economic situation. Obviously, they cannot. I mean, a lot of right now, because of coronavirus anyway, all expats are staying home, just like everybody else. Nobody is doing any work. So, but yet at the same time, with lower economic output, with slower economies, I don't think that these governments, these states, are going to be able to accommodate much more labor than they already have. They probably would like to just get rid of some of that labor, and that's probably what's going to happen once the skies open up and people can go back. So it's likely that they're going to be cutting down on the number of expat laborers. As far as citizenship is concerned, for these states that already have a problem, we were talking earlier about the social contract. They're already having a problem with the social contract with their own citizens right now. They cannot provide what those citizens have been used to. So why would they, naturalize more people? Because if they do, they're going to have to supply the same kind of terms for the social contract, which they cannot afford to do anyway. So I doubt that there will be any naturalization. I, on the other hand, think that once, like I said earlier, once the skies open up, a lot of these people are going to be let go. A lot of economic activity has basically practically stopped, totally stopped. And many of these people have either, the expats, have either been just furloughed but not sent back home, or have been have had their salaries cut and the benefits cut, specifically because just like as an economic situation forced them to do. So yeah, expat labor will remain essential, very important for the Gulf Arabs, but I don't think that they are going to be able to accommodate many more.
Imad, just out of curiosity, like in the 1950s, we had a pan-Arab movement when things were, fairly bad for the Arab world early in independence. Is there any sentiment left with growing nationalism in the Arab world for some sort of, pan-Arabism or Arab union so that they can work more effectively together to deal with this sort of conflagration of crises?
Well, you'd think, unfortunately, you'd think that they would, that the problem with coronavirus or things of that nature would prompt Arabs to really work more closely together and think that they have a common cause and a common history and common future, whatever. But unfortunately, that's not the case. The farther away you get from the time of independence, the less likely it is that there will be some sort of a system, government, ideology, whatever you want to call it, that would bind the Arabs together. These are the centers of power of each state is its own capital. It's not looking across the borders to try to be in an alliance or build an Arab entity of some sort. I mean, look at the Gulf Cooperation Council. I mean, we're coming up on the 3rd anniversary of the Gulf crisis, and they're still trying to stir up trouble against Qatar. And the bots are almost like reigniting the whole crisis. The bots are being, led by some people, obviously. The Gulf countries are more dismembered, disorganized, disunited than they have ever been. So I doubt that the sentiment is there or anybody is going to be working for it. At least, I doubt it with authoritarian Arab governments. Authoritarian Arab governments are only looking to control whatever territory they can control. And if they broaden that territory, they are afraid that they will lose the control that they want.
Imad, has there been any sentiment at all in any of these countries to pivot toward a different economic basis, let's say? We've experienced in the West want to return to manufacturing and things like that. Obviously this is a kind of oh crap moment for a lot of these oil producing countries that have just all of a sudden had their economic rug swept out from under them. So has there been any sentiment for these countries to try and pivot in some way?
Well, there is a sentiment on all Gulf countries that they want to lessen their dependence on oil. They want to diversify their economies into tourism and agriculture. Well, agriculture doesn't work. Industry may work. The petrochemicals and things of that nature will work. Tourism will work definitely, but the problem with tourism is you need more expat labor to do tourism for you. You're not going to be able to be a tour guide or to be a waiter in a restaurant if you belong to a very rich social strata of society. So yes, they are able to diversify. The problem is on what basis, and do they really know how to diversify? And that's what's needed. Other Arab countries can augment their agriculture and industrial sectors and their services sectors, but all of this requires major investments that require a lot of money that these countries do not have. So I think it's going to be a long time before they arrive there. I hope that it is as short as it should be, but I doubt that it's happening anytime soon.
Seems to be a wasted opportunity then for their golden years to invest in something different.
That's correct, yes.
Okay, gentlemen. Imad, thank you very much for your time and for your insights on Strategicon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.
Thanks for listening, everyone. We hope that you'll join us for our next exciting adventure through the world of geopolitics. Remember that you could subscribe to Strategicon through the Ozcast network, iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn, Spotify, and please like us on the Sage International Australia Facebook site and follow us on Twitter. We appreciate your support. Also, please comment on any of our articles and podcasts through Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and of course on the Sage International Australia site. We welcome any constructive feedback that can help improve our products, and we look forward to engaging with our followers. Until next time, goodbye.
Life is uncertain. It's okay to feel stressed, anxious, worried, or frustrated. CalHope can help. Access CalHope's free and secure mental health resources. Call 833-317-4673 or live chat at calhope.org.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.